If you notice these 7 signs, God has chosen you for something great. What if everything you've been through, every heartbreak, every betrayal, every storm was never meant to destroy you, but to prepare you? What if the very struggles that made you question your worth were actually signs that God has chosen you for something far greater than you ever imagined? Think about it. Have you ever felt like you don't quite belong in this world? Like no matter how hard you try to fit in, something deep inside you resists? You see others chasing after money, luxury, comfort, yet none of it satisfies you. You've always felt this pull, this unshakable sense that your life was meant for more. But why? Let me ask you this. Why have you faced battles others never seem to encounter? Why have doors slammed shut when you thought you were finally stepping into your breakthrough? Why does life feel like an endless test, pushing you to your limits, while others seem to coast by effortlessly? I'll tell you why. Because you are not ordinary. You were never meant to live a common, empty life. You were set apart, chosen. And if you're watching this right now, it is not by accident. This message was meant for you. In the next few minutes, I will reveal 7 powerful signs, clear, undeniable signs that God has placed His hand on you. Signs that explain why your life has felt like a battlefield. Signs that will open your eyes to the truth. You are not forgotten. You are being prepared for something greater than you can imagine. But before we go any further, I want you to do something right now. Write this in the comments. I believe that God has chosen me for something great. This isn't just a comment. This is a declaration, a battle cry, a moment where you step into the truth of who you really are. You have spent years questioning, doubting, wondering why your journey has been filled with so much pain. Today, that ends. Today, you'll finally see why everything had to happen the way it did. Stay with me until the end, because once you know these signs, you will never see your life the same way again. Sign number 1, a restless heart. You know you were made for more. Have you ever looked around and felt disconnected? Like everyone else seems content, but you just can't settle? You've tried to live a normal life, follow the rules, do what's expected. But deep inside, something keeps pulling at you. A whisper that won't fade. A hunger that nothing can satisfy. You've seen people chase after money, power, success. You've watched them build their lives around comfort, their careers, their wealth. Yet, no matter how much they have, something inside you knows that's not enough. That's not what life is really about. And here's the question that keeps haunting you. Why do I feel like this? Why can't I just be happy with what everyone else wants? Because you were never meant to live an ordinary life. You were created for something greater, something eternal, something that no job, no house, no amount of money can ever give you. Look at what God says in Jeremiah 1 verse 5. Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. Do you hear that? Before you ever took your first breath, God already had a plan for you. Before the world even knew your name, your purpose was written. And that purpose is why you've never been able to settle. That's why a normal life has never felt right. That's why you've spent nights lying awake, wondering if there's more. Because there is. But here's the truth that many people don't want to hear. Being chosen doesn't mean an easy life. It means struggle. It means trials. It means refining. Look at Joseph. He had dreams of greatness, visions from God. But before he ever stepped into that destiny, he was betrayed, sold into slavery, thrown into prison for a crime he didn't commit. To the outside world, it looked like his life was falling apart. But in reality, God was positioning him for his destiny. The same is true for you. The setbacks, the heartbreaks, the losses, they weren't meant to destroy you. They were shaping you, refining you, preparing you. But the real question is, will you listen? Will you embrace this calling, this pull inside you? Or will you keep pushing it away, pretending you're just like everyone else? Because the truth is, you know you're not. You've always known. And now, you have a choice. You can ignore this feeling, drown it out with distractions, with temporary pleasures that never truly satisfy. Or you can step into what God has been calling you to all along. Because if you're feeling this restlessness, if you know in your heart that there's more, then that's your first sign. God is calling you. He's been all along. The question is, are you ready to listen? Sign number 2. You face intense spiritual battles. The enemy knows who you are. Have you ever wondered why your life has been so hard? Why every time you take a step forward, something tries to pull you back? Why doors close when you least expect it? Why people betray you? Why storms hit just when you thought you were finally finding peace? Let me tell you something that will change the way you see your struggles. The enemy doesn't attack people who aren't a threat. If your life has felt like a battlefield, it's because it is. You're not just another person drifting through this world. You are chosen. And the moment God places his hand on someone's life, the enemy takes notice. Look at Joseph. The moment God gave him a vision of his future, the attacks began. His own brothers turned against him, sold him into slavery, and tried to erase him from existence. But why? Because the enemy saw what Joseph was about to become. The same thing is happening to you. The hardships you faced weren't random. The betrayals, the losses, the moments of crushing despair, none of it was by accident. The enemy has been trying to break you before you ever step into the destiny God has for you. Think about your own life. Have you ever trusted someone, only to have them turn on you? Have you ever faced financial ruin, despite doing everything right? Have you ever felt so overwhelmed, so exhausted, that you questioned if God had forgotten you? He hasn't. You are being refined, strengthened, prepared, because when you finally step into your calling, you will be unstoppable. Look at Job, a man who had it all: wealth, family, success. And then, in a moment, everything was stripped away. His friends told him to curse God. His wife told him to give up. But Job held on, and in the end, God restored everything he had lost, double. What if your struggles are not punishment, but preparation? What if the battle you're fighting right now is actually proof that you are chosen? Because the enemy doesn't waste time on people who don't matter. He goes after the ones who carry the greatest purpose, and that includes you. So the next time you feel under attack, don't break. Don't run. Don't question whether God has left you. Instead, remember this truth. If the battle is intense, it means your purpose is even greater. And if you're still standing, if you're still fighting, then hear me. God is not done with you yet. Sign number 3. You feel a deep conviction. Even when you stumble, you can't walk away. Have you ever tried to ignore God, only to feel him pulling you back? Have you ever drifted, made mistakes, or even walked into sin, only to be overwhelmed by a weight you can't shake? That's not guilt. That's not just your conscience. That is God refusing to let you go. Others live how they please. They chase after money, success, pleasure, never stopping to think about the consequences. They do what feels good, no regrets, no second thoughts. But you can't. You feel the weight of your actions. You can't escape the conviction pressing on your soul. Even when you try to ignore it, it lingers. When others sin, they feel nothing. But when you do, it eats away at you. Have you ever wondered why? Because you are chosen. Look at David, a man after God's own heart. He made terrible mistakes. He committed adultery. He orchestrated a murder. Yet, he couldn't live in his sin. His heart broke under the weight of separation from God. And when he repented, God didn't abandon him. He restored him. The enemy wants you to believe your failures disqualify you, that your past mistakes have ruined your purpose, that God has given up on you. But listen to me. If you still feel conviction, that means God has not left you. Because those who are not chosen, they don't feel that pull. Think back on your life. How many times have you tried to walk away from God, only to feel his presence chasing after you? How many times have you tried to silence his voice, only to have it whisper even louder? That is a sign. That is proof. God has placed his spirit inside you, and he will not let you destroy yourself. But here's what you need to understand. Conviction is not condemnation. God is not calling you back to shame you. He is calling you back to restore you, to redeem you, to remind you that you are still his. Look at Peter. He denied Jesus 3 times. He failed in the moment that mattered most. But did Jesus reject him? No. He called him again. He gave him a greater purpose. And now, God is doing the same for you. So if you've ever felt like you've messed up too much, if you've ever felt unworthy, if you've ever believed that God is done with you, hear me now. He's not. He is still calling your name. The question is, will you answer? Sign number 4. You experience supernatural provision. God always makes a way. Have you ever faced a moment where you thought, this is it? This is where everything falls apart. I don't see a way out. I don't know how I'll make it through. Maybe you lost your job when you least expected it. Maybe your bank account hit zero and you didn't know where your next meal would come from. Maybe you were drowning in medical bills, debt piling up, no relief in sight. But then, somehow, someway, God made a way. A door opened at the last second. An unexpected check arrived in the mail. Someone stepped in to help when you least expected it. What should have destroyed you didn't. What should have taken everything from you didn't. And now, looking back, you realize that was never luck. That was God. The world calls it coincidence. They say it was chance, a stroke of luck. But you know the truth. Because this isn't the first time. Time and time again, God has stepped in right when you were about to lose hope. Think about it. Has there ever been a time in your life where you should have fallen, but somehow you stood? A time where you should have lost everything, but instead you were sustained? That is not an accident. That is divine provision. Look at Elijah in 1 Kings 17. There was famine in the land. No food, no water. Everything around him was drying up. And yet, God sent ravens to feed him. When the brook dried up, God led him to a widow, one who had only a handful of flour and a little oil left. She thought she would die, but because she obeyed God, her supply never ran out. Do you see the pattern? When God calls someone, He provides for them. Not always in the way we expect, not always in the timing we want, but always right on time. Maybe right now, you're in a season where you don't see a way out. Maybe you're barely making ends meet. Maybe you feel like you've lost everything, and you're wondering if God has forgotten you. But listen to me, He hasn't. Because the same God who sustained Elijah, the same God who fed the Israelites in the wilderness, the same God who multiplied the loaves and fish, is the same God watching over you. And if you're still here, if you have breath in your lungs, if you have seen miracles, big or small, that is proof that you are chosen. God does not abandon those He calls. So don't let fear consume you. Don't let worry steal your faith. Because when you least expect it, He will come through again. The only question is, do you trust Him? Sign number 5. You carry the weight of others. Your heart breaks for what breaks God's. Have you ever looked at the suffering in the world and felt something inside you ache? Have you ever seen injustice, pain, or brokenness and thought, I can't just stand by and watch? While others move on, distracted by their own lives, you can't. You feel it deeply. The weight of the world sits heavy on your heart. It keeps you up at night. It makes you weep for people you don't even know. And sometimes you wonder, why do I feel this so deeply? Why do I carry burdens that aren't mine? Why can't I just live like everyone else, focused on my own success, my own comfort, my own future? Because you were chosen. This is not just empathy. This is not just a soft heart. This is the mark of someone who carries God's burden. Look at Nehemiah. He lived in the palace, surrounded by wealth, comfort, and security. He had everything the world says should bring happiness. But when he heard that the walls of Jerusalem were broken, he wept. He mourned. He fasted and prayed because he couldn't ignore what was happening to God's people. Think about that for a moment. Nehemiah could have ignored it. He could have stayed comfortable. But he didn't, because God had placed that burden on his heart. The same is happening to you. You've probably experienced moments where you felt an unshakable need to help someone, even when you had little to give. You've likely prayed for people who never even knew you were interceding for them. Maybe you felt called to serve, to give, to fight for something bigger than yourself, even when it made no logical sense. This is a divine sign. God has not placed this weight on just anyone. He gives it to those He trusts. He gives it to those He has set apart. But let's be honest, this burden isn't easy to carry. There are days you feel overwhelmed. Days you ask, God, why do you let me see things so clearly while others seem blind? Days you wonder why your heart breaks when the world keeps moving like nothing is wrong. It's because you were never meant to live for yourself. You understand something that many don't. Life is not about what you gain, it's about what you give. Moses felt this weight. He tried to ignore it. He tried to blend in, but his burden wouldn't let him stay comfortable. Eventually, he had no choice but to answer God's call. The same is true for you. You could try to silence this calling, to push it away. You could try to live a normal life, but something inside you won't let you, because you are not called to be ordinary. So the question is, what will you do with this burden? Will you let it crush you? Will you let the weight of the world make you bitter, exhausted, overwhelmed? Or will you surrender it to God? Let Him use you. Let Him guide you into the purpose He created for you. Because this burden is not a curse, it is confirmation. God has entrusted you with something powerful, and now it's time to step into it. Sign number 6, God separates you from certain people, not to punish you, but to prepare you. Have you ever wondered why certain people walked out of your life? Why friendships that once felt unbreakable suddenly faded? Why relationships that meant everything to you ended without warning? It hurt, didn't it? The confusion, the loneliness, the questions that kept you awake at night. Did I do something wrong? Was I not enough? Why does it feel like people keep leaving me? But what if I told you this wasn't rejection, it was protection? God doesn't just remove people from your life randomly. He separates you from the wrong people, not to punish you, but to prepare you. Because some people, no matter how much you love them, are not meant to go where God is taking you. Look at Moses. He grew up in Pharaoh's palace, surrounded by power, wealth, and influence. But when it was time for him to step into his true calling, God pulled him away. Moses had to leave behind everything familiar. He had to walk away from a life of privilege to become the leader God created him to be. What if Moses had clung to Egypt? What if he had refused to let go? He would have never led God's people to freedom. And the same is true for you. Some people in your life were only meant to be there for a season. Some relationships were only meant to teach you a lesson. And if God allowed them to leave, it's because they were never part of your destiny. But I know what you're thinking. Why did it have to hurt so much? Because separation is never easy. It's painful to watch people walk away. It's heartbreaking to feel alone, to wonder why certain relationships ended. But sometimes what feels like loss is actually grace. Think about it. Have you ever looked back at a relationship and realized that if that person had stayed, they would have held you back? That if they had never left, you would have never grown? Maybe you begged God to keep them in your life. Maybe you prayed for that friendship, that relationship, that connection to last. But what you didn't see, what God saw, was the destruction ahead. And so, He closed the door. Look at Joseph. His own brothers betrayed him, sold him into slavery, and left him for dead. It felt like the ultimate rejection. But what they meant for harm, God used for good. That betrayal positioned Joseph for the palace. What if Joseph had stayed with his brothers? What if he had never been separated from them? He would have never stepped into his destiny. And now, I ask you, what if God is doing the same in your life? What if every person who left was actually making room for something greater? What if every relationship that ended was a sign that God is moving you into a new season? Because here's the truth, not everyone can handle your calling. Some people will slow you down. Some people will distract you. Some people will try to pull you back into a life that no longer fits you. And so, in His mercy, God removes them. It doesn't mean you don't love them. It doesn't mean they were bad people. It simply means they weren't assigned to your future. So instead of asking why did they leave, start asking God, what are you making room for? Because every person who walks away, every door that closes, every season of loneliness, it's not the end. It's the beginning of something greater. Will you trust Him? Sign number 7. You are attacked but never defeated. The battle is proof of your calling. Have you ever felt like life keeps knocking you down? Like no matter how hard you try, you're always facing another battle? Just when you think you've found peace, another storm comes crashing in. Just when you start to rebuild, something else falls apart. And you wonder, why does this keep happening? Why does life feel like one endless fight? Why does it seem like the more I try to follow God, the harder things become? Let me tell you something that will change the way you see your struggles. The enemy does not attack people who are not a threat. If you have been under relentless attack, it's because you are dangerous to the kingdom of darkness. Look at Paul. He was shipwrecked, beaten, imprisoned. Everywhere he went, trouble followed him. But did that stop him? No, because he knew the truth. The battle was proof of his calling. Look at Job. He lost everything: his wealth, his family, his health. The enemy threw everything he had at Job, trying to break him. But in the end, God restored him double. Now, look at your own life. How many times have you been knocked down, but somehow you got back up? How many times have you faced heartbreak, loss, betrayal, but you survived? That's not by accident. That's not because you're strong on your own. That is because God's hand is on your life, and the enemy knows it. He has tried to take your peace. He has tried to shake your faith. He has tried to make you question if God has abandoned you. But listen to me, you are still here. The fact that you're still standing, still believing, still holding on, that is the biggest sign that you are chosen. Because the enemy has done everything in his power to break you, and he failed. And here's what the enemy does not want you to realize. Every battle you've faced has only made you stronger. Every attack has been training. Every hardship has been refining you. Every time you felt like giving up, but you didn't, that was God strengthening you for what's ahead. Because here's the truth. Great battles only come before great victories. Look at David. Before he became king, he was hunted. Before he wore the crown, he was hiding in caves. The anointing on his life attracted attacks, but in the end, he stepped into his destiny. And the same is true for you. So don't let the battle make you bitter. Don't let the fight make you question your purpose. Instead, let it confirm that you are chosen. Because if the enemy is fighting this hard to stop you, imagine how powerful you will be when you step into everything God has for you. The battle is real, but so is your victory. The attacks are fierce, but so is God's protection. And if you are still standing, that means God is not finished with you yet. So now I ask you, will you keep fighting? Now, you know the truth. Everything you have faced, every storm, every betrayal, every sleepless night was never meant to break you. It was meant to prepare you. You were never forgotten. You were never abandoned. You were chosen. But now, the real question is, what will you do with this knowledge? Will you keep living in doubt? Will you let fear hold you back? Or will you step boldly into the destiny God has been shaping you for all along? Because make no mistake, you were never meant to live an ordinary life. The battles you faced were not punishment. They were training. The losses you've endured were not the end. They were a new beginning. And every tear you've cried, God has counted them all. But now, He is calling you to something greater. No more questioning. No more wondering. No more waiting. It's time to step into your purpose. If this message spoke to your heart, if you feel that pull inside you, I want you to do something right now. Write your prayer in the comments. Let the world know that you are ready. Maybe you need healing. Maybe you need direction. Maybe you're tired, weary, and desperate for a breakthrough. Speak it. Declare it. Give it to God. Because this moment is not an accident. This is your divine invitation. And one day, when you stand before the gates of heaven, you will see it was all worth it. Every battle, every struggle, every single tear, you were always chosen.